The bell has already rung. The monastery is waking. Not suddenly, not all at once. Ever wonder what daily life was really like for a monk, far beyond the dusty certainty of a textbook where pages tell you what was believed, but rarely show you how the hours actually felt as they moved through the body one after another? Imagine a life where time is not something you spend or race against or try to fill, but something you keep. Settle in. There is nowhere you need to go. Tonight, the noise does not need to be pushed away. It is not resisted. It is simply allowed to remain elsewhere until it no longer presses itself forward. This is a whispered journey into a medieval English monastery, a place where time was not chased or measured for productivity, but held carefully, hour by hour, as something to be protected rather than used. Here, days did not ask to be efficient. They did not demand improvement or speed. They asked to be faithful. No alarms waited by the bed, no choices needed to be made, only a quiet agreement renewed each morning between the body and the bell. You will not hear of kings tonight. No wars approach these walls. No news arrives from the outside world. Instead, we will quietly witness what an ordinary day felt like for one monk among many, living a life shaped by repetition, by silence, and by trust in the rhythm of returning hours. Welcome to a quiet moment wrapped in candlelight history. I am Amadeo Francis Hawthorne, your humble guide and storyteller. Tonight we wander together into the forgotten corners of the past. But first, if you don't mind, whisper in the comments where you're listening from and at what hour your candle burns tonight. Prologue, where the day begins. Imagine waking before dawn, not to an alarm and not to a bustling street, but to the quiet expectation of ritual, as if the stone itself remembers what comes next. Somewhere beyond the reach of ordinary noise, a day begins in shadow, with breath you can see, with hands that move slowly, as though rushing might disturb something sacred. In this whispered history journey, we step into those unseen rhythms, the prayers that greet the dark, the steady work that keeps life moving, and the devotion spoken so softly it feels meant for the heart, not the ear. And as evening arrives, we follow the same path in reverse, watching the light thin, the final prayers gather like a cloak, and the night return not as something feared, but as something received. Not for shock, not for spectacle. Just a quiet witnessing of solitude, of discipline, and of peace in a world that chose silence on purpose. Chapter 1. Before Dawn. Before the world begins, before fields stir, before towns remember themselves, there is already movement behind stone walls. Not movement driven by urgency, not the kind that tries to arrive somewhere quickly. Just the quiet understanding that this hour has arrived, as it always does, without asking. In a medieval English monastery, the day does not begin with choice. It begins with obedience to time itself, a time measured not by clocks, but by memory, by habit, by bells that have rung in the same order for generations. The night still holds the corridors. Darkness has not yet loosened its grip. The air is cold enough to make every breath feel intentional. A monk rises from his narrow bed. The straw mattress shifts softly beneath him, a sound so small it disappears almost as soon as it exists, absorbed by stone walls that have learned over centuries how to keep secrets. There is no mirror here, no need to check the face for readiness. The body already knows what is expected of it. A simple robe is drawn close, heavy with wool, rough against sleep-warmed skin, a quiet reminder that comfort has never been the goal. Footsteps move along the dormitory floor, slow, measured. Not because silence is enforced, but because silence has become the most natural language. Others rise as well, figures emerging from shadow, their shapes softened by darkness, their individuality gently set aside for something shared. Somewhere nearby, a bell sounds. Not sharp, not urgent. Firm enough to gather attention and without startling the soul. This is matins, the hour kept while the rest of the world still dreams. The chapel waits. Stone arches rise above them, their curves barely visible and as though the building itself is only half awake. Breath fogs the air, hands tuck into sleeves. The cold is not fought. It is acknowledged, accepted, allowed to exist. When the chanting begins, it does not rush forward. Each line is placed carefully, as though sound itself might fracture if handled too roughly. Voices blend, not to impress, not to perform, but to steady the mind against wandering. This is not prayer as emotion. It is prayer as structure. Words repeated night after night, year after year, until they no longer ask to be understood. They simply exist, like the stone beneath bare feet, like the cold air in the lungs, like the darkness that has not yet agreed to leave. In these hours before dawn, no one is exceptional, no one is invisible. Each monk becomes part of a living rhythm, a rhythm that has survived kings, plagues, wars, and the slow erosion of time itself. When the final note fades, it is not replaced by conversation. Silence returns, thicker now, as though it has been reinforced by sound. The day has begun, and it will unfold slowly, patiently, hour by hour, until night comes again to receive it. Chapter 2, Morning Order. When the chapel empties, the night does not leave all at once. Darkness loosens slowly, as if it too must be persuaded to let go, lingering in corners and along the stone long after the chanting has ended. Somewhere beyond the monastery walls, the sky begins to thin. Not yet bright, not fully awake, but no longer sealed shut, as though morning is approaching carefully, unwilling to disturb what has already settled. This is prime, not a beginning marked by energy or intention, but by continuation. The day has already begun, and this hour simply receives it, shaping what is already in motion rather than calling something new into being. The monk moves again through familiar corridors, his steps uncounted, his path known so well that the body no longer needs instruction. Stone meets bare or sandaled feet in the same places it always has, and nothing in the movement asks to be noticed. Light enters quietly through narrow windows, touching stone that has held the cold of night and warming it almost imperceptibly. The monastery does not brighten suddenly. It softens as though light itself has learned restraint. Morning prayer is shorter now, less hidden in darkness, but no less steady. The words rise and fall without urgency, not reaching outward, not searching for response, but settling into place as they always do. When the final syllable fades, there is no pause for reflection, because reflection has never been separate from what comes next. It is carried forward, quietly, into the work that follows. Hands take up tasks without announcement, sweeping stone floors worn smooth by centuries, tending small gardens still wet with night air, lifting tools whose weight is already familiar. No one rushes to be useful. Usefulness here is assumed. Silence remains present as the work continues, not enforced and not strained, but held gently between movements. Even when monks pass one another, there is no exchange that needs to take place, only a nod, a shared direction, and then space returning. This is the hour when the monastery fully wakes without ever becoming loud. Breath deepens, muscles warm, and the mind settles into the body instead of pulling ahead of it. Outside, birds begin to speak, not as a signal, but as a background presence, a reminder that the world continues whether it is acknowledged or not. Inside the walls, nothing changes course. The rhythm holds. And the day, now fully awake, moves forward without ever hurrying. Chapter 3. Work and Stillness. As the morning moves further from dawn, the monastery grows quieter in a different way, not because there is less happening, but because the work has found its rhythm and no longer needs to announce itself. This is the hour when effort becomes steady enough to disappear. The body leans into familiar motions, repeating them not for variety or interest, but because repetition allows the mind to soften its grip. Time here is felt through weight rather than sound, the weight of tools lifted and returned, the weight of water carried and poured, the weight of the body itself, learning how to move without impatience. Nothing about this work seeks attention. It is not performed. It is not evaluated. It exists simply because the day asks for it and because the body is capable of answering. Some tasks require strength, others patience, but none ask to be rushed. Movement settles into a pace that feels older than the individual, as though the work itself remembers how it is meant to be done. In this steadiness, the mind gradually loosens its hold on outcomes. There is no finish line to imagine, no improvement to measure, only the next motion and then the one after that. Even thought begins to slow, not because it is pushed away, but because attention has found somewhere else to rest, in pressure, in balance, in the quiet accuracy of repeated action. In places set aside for careful labor, the pace slows further still. Hands learn restraint, eyes follow lines already begun. The world narrows gently to what is directly in front of them. Here, time stretches without feeling long. Minutes lose their edges. The body works, the hands continue, and the mind settles into the background, no longer urging the day forward. This is not stillness that comes from stopping. It is stillness that forms inside movement, when effort is held evenly enough that it no longer disturbs the breath. The monastery protects this balance carefully, not silence alone and not labor alone, but the space where the two overlap without strain. As the hour deepens, nothing changes outwardly, and yet something has shifted. The body has learned the day more fully, and time once again is being kept. Chapter 4. Midday. Quiet. As the sun reaches its highest point, the monastery does not grow brighter in spirit. It grows steadier, as though the day has found its center and no longer needs to lean in either direction. This is Sext, the hour that does not ask for effort or initiation, but for balance. The morning's labor has been carried long enough to be felt, and the afternoon has not yet begun to pull at attention. Light now rests fully on stone, no longer tentative, no longer creeping. It settles where it lands, warming walls, columns, and courtyards evenly without emphasis. Bodies respond almost without instruction. Shoulders loosen, breath deepens. The pace that was learned through work is allowed to soften without disappearing. Prayer returns briefly, not to restart the day, but to gather it. Words are fewer now, spoken in the middle of light rather than its edges, and they arrive without urgency or weight. When the final words fade, there is no rush back into motion. Stillness lingers naturally, as though the space itself has decided to hold it a little longer. Simple nourishment follows, taken without ceremony. Food is received as sustenance, not reward, and eating becomes another quiet act of attention rather than interruption. The body rests without collapsing. Sitting replaces standing. Hands remain occupied lightly, or rest where they fall, without guilt or permission. In this hour, time feels broader. Moments stretch, not because nothing is happening, but because nothing is being pushed forward. The mind, having learned steadiness through work, now learns openness. Thoughts drift through more slowly, no longer demanding resolution, no longer pressing for what comes next. Even the air feels different. Sound carries a little farther. Silence feels less dense, more spacious, as though it has room to breathe. This is not sleep. It is not idleness. It is the quiet recalibration of the day, the place where effort and rest briefly meet without tension. The monastery does not mark this hour loudly. It allows it. And as Sext passes, the day remains intact, balanced, unhurried, and ready to continue without strain. Chapter 5. The Long Afternoon. After the quiet balance of midday, the afternoon does not announce itself. It arrives without ceremony, as though the day simply continues breathing, one slow breath following another. This is the longest stretch of time in the monastery, not because it is difficult, but because it is open. There are fewer markers now, fewer moments that divide 1 hour from the next, and the day begins to feel wide rather than structured. Light shifts gradually, almost imperceptibly. Shadows lengthen without drawing attention to themselves, and stone that was evenly warmed at noon begins to cool again, returning quietly to its familiar state. Work resumes, but without the firmness of the morning. Tasks are lighter now, slower, shaped by endurance rather than effort, allowing the body to remain occupied without being pressed. There is no sense of rushing toward evening. Time is not something to be completed or used well. It is simply held, allowed to pass through the hands without resistance. The mind responds by loosening its grip. Thoughts wander more freely, arriving and leaving without demanding attention, as though they too have learned that nothing urgent is required. In this part of the day, silence feels different, less dense than in the morning, less expansive than at midday. It settles into the background like a steady presence that no longer needs to be noticed. Movement becomes minimal. Pauses stretch naturally between actions, and even effort seems to slow, as if the body understands that the day is already complete in some essential way. The monastery holds this hour carefully, not by filling it and not by escaping it, but by letting it exist exactly as it is, unremarkable and sufficient. Here time feels almost suspended, not stopped but freed from direction, no longer pulling toward what comes next. This is the hour where patience is no longer practiced, it is simply present. And slowly, without instruction or signal, the day begins to lean toward evening, ready to release what it has carried. Chapter 6: Evening Return. As the light begins to lower, the monastery senses the change before it is seen. Stone cools, air settles, and the wide openness of the afternoon slowly gives way to something more contained. This is Vespers, the hour that gathers what the day has scattered, not by reviewing it and not by judging it, but by allowing it to return quietly to its place. Light now enters from a different angle, stretching across walls and floors with longer shadows. Nothing dramatic announces the shift. It is simply the way the day turns, as it always has. Movement slows again, not from fatigue, but from recognition. The body begins to prepare for stillness without being told, easing out of effort as naturally as it once eased into it. Prayer returns in the evening not as discipline, but as release. Words are spoken softly, shaped by voices that no longer carry the edge of morning, settling into the space like familiar companions. There is no need to hold the day tightly now. What has been done is allowed to remain done without replay or correction. Sound changes in this hour. Footsteps soften. Even silence feels warmer, as though it has absorbed the day's light and is holding it briefly before night arrives. When the final words of prayer fade, they do not echo. They rest, leaving behind a quiet that feels earned rather than imposed. The monastery does not rush toward darkness. It allows the light to leave at its own pace, trusting the night to arrive when it is ready. In this hour, time narrows again, not to confine but to protect, drawing the edges of the day closer so nothing spills into rest. What remains is a sense of completion without finality. The day is not ending, it is simply being set down. And as evening deepens, the monastery holds steady, ready to enter the quiet hours with nothing left unfinished. Chapter 7: Night in Compline. As darkness settles fully around the monastery, nothing resists it. The last traces of daylight are allowed to fade, and the world beyond the walls grows indistinct, as though it has gently stepped back. This is Compline, the final prayer of the day. Not a gathering meant to hold attention, but one meant to release it, easing the mind away from effort and into trust. Candles now do most of the work. Their light does not reach far, but it reaches enough, softening stone and shadow alike, allowing the night to feel contained rather than vast. Words are few in this hour. What is spoken has been spoken many times before, and no longer asks to be understood or remembered. It simply passes through the air and settles. The body responds almost immediately. Breath deepens. Muscles release the small tensions they have carried quietly all day, no longer needed now that nothing more is required. Silence returns differently at night. It is not the silence of preparation and not the silence of work, but the silence of permission. Permission to stop holding the day together. When prayer ends, there is no lingering, no conversation, no turning back. Movement becomes minimal and careful, as though even sound has grown tired. Footsteps soften, doors close gently, without echo. Cells receive their occupants again, simple rooms offering no distraction, only familiarity. The same walls, the same bed, the same quiet that has returned night after night. Here the body lies down without reviewing the day. What has passed is allowed to remain in the dark, unexamined, already complete. The mind follows slowly, releasing its final attachments to time and sequence. no longer concerned with what has been done or what remains. Outside, the night deepens. Inside, stillness settles into its most stable form. Nothing more is asked. And held within stone walls and quiet breath, the monastery rests, waiting gently for the hours that will return before dawn. Chapter 8. The Long Night. With Compline finished and movement stilled, the monastery does not fall asleep all at once. It settles slowly into the long night, as though rest itself must arrive gradually, finding its way into stone and breath without disturbance. There are no tasks left to complete, no hours left to observe. The structure that held the day loosens its grip, and time becomes something wide and indistinct, no longer divided or counted. Candles burn lower now, their light softening rather than dimming, rounding the edges of shadow until nothing feels sharp. Stone releases the warmth it gathered during the day, offering it back to the air in quiet exchange. Inside the cells, bodies rest without instruction. Sleep is not pursued. It is allowed, arriving in its own manner, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, always without demand. Thoughts drift in and out without attachment. Memories surface and pass. Plans dissolve before they fully form, as though the night itself is gently refusing to carry them. Silence deepens, not by becoming heavier, but by becoming more complete. Even the smallest sounds feel absorbed, folded into something larger and more forgiving. Outside the walls, darkness stretches across fields and paths, indifferent to the hours that once structured the day. Stars remain unseen or briefly visible, and then hidden again, unconcerned with attention. Inside, the monastery holds its shape without effort. Nothing needs to be watched, nothing needs to be remembered. This is the longest part of the day, though it does not feel long. Without markers or bells, time loses its edges and becomes simply presence. Here, rest is not an action. It is a condition, one that surrounds the body and mind equally, asking nothing in return. The night does not hurry toward morning. It expands gently, confident that the hours before dawn will arrive when they are ready. And held within darkness, stone and steady breath, the monastery waits, not in expectation, but in trust, for the rhythm to begin again. Nothing more needs to happen. Epilogue, before the bell returns. And so the night holds. Nothing stirs, nothing waits impatiently. Within stone walls and steady breath, time rests, unmeasured, undisturbed. The hours no longer need names, they no longer ask to be noticed, they simply pass quietly as they always have. Candles burn lower, not in urgency, but in agreement with the dark, their light softening the edges of thought until nothing feels sharp enough to disturb rest. Breath finds its own rhythm. The body settles into the familiar weight of stillness, held gently by stone, by darkness, by the quiet certainty that nothing more is required. Outside, the world continues without demand. Inside, the monastery remains unchanged, keeping its shape through the night without effort. There is no need to remember the day now, no need to prepare for what comes next. The night has accepted everything just as it is. The bell will return before dawn, as it always has, calling the hours back into form. But that moment is still far away. For now, there is only this quiet, complete, and enough. You may rest here. Nothing more needs to happen.